Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session on commercial realities and running fit for purpose and diverse RWD strategies for small biotech versus big pharma. Real world data is critical for evidence generation, but the way it's used can look very different depending on the size of the organization. Smaller biotechs often have to be agile and resourceful, finding focus and cost effective approaches. Larger pharma companies, on the other hand, work at scale, thinking about global integration, consistency, and impact across markets. In this discussion, we'll hear both perspectives, explore the challenges and opportunities each side faces, and look at where these strategies overlap. The goal is to understand how both small and large players can make the most of the real world data to drive innovation, generate trusted evidence, and ultimately deliver better outcomes for patients. I would like to introduce the moderator for this session, Jeff Trotter. An entrepreneur, researcher, and consultant, Jeff has been a pioneer in health economics and outcomes research and an industry leader in real world evidence through patient registries and observational studies. He founded and led multiple pharma services companies, held senior executive roles at global CROs, and now supports scientific and strategic RWE initiatives through his independent consultancy, J Trotter Research and Consulting. Introducing the panelists, Dan Poscover, co-founder of Graticule, is a renowned strategic advisor to life science companies, medical device organizations, and health systems. At Graticule, Dan works closely with our international client base to optimize use of data analytics and real-world evidence to advance personalized medicine and improve population health around the globe. Uh, Next, we have Dr. Ben MWI. He's the CEO of Data for Life, a global non-profit health tech organization funded by the Hasso Plattner Foundation, building open source infrastructure to democratize medical discovery and advance health equity worldwide. With over 15 years of enterprise health technology, Ben bridges medicine and research and technology. He also serves as CMO at Thinking Node Life Science and has held leadership roles across biotech, pharma, and academia, including Harvard, Dresden International University, and Berlin University Medical System. I would now like to hand it over to the moderator, Jeff Trotter, to commence the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Shika. I was going to have Dan and Ben introduce themselves, but I think you've done a great job of giving their perspectives. That said, it occurs to me that we all kind of came to this field from a little bit of different pathways, and maybe Dan and Ben, I can ask you guys to kind of share with us a little bit of your journey, providing some perspective on how you got to where you are today. What are some of the things that really led you to your current roles? And Dan, let me start with you.
Yeah, well, it's a long road from where I started to where I am now, but I don't want to take. I always joke that I can give the 45 minutes and the 3 minutes. I'll give the 3-minute background, but so my background is really I started as an early entrepreneur in the biotech sector in Boston and was with 3 biotech firms in the 2000s. Spent a few years in strategy consulting firm with a firm called Scienti Advisors that bought by Precision for Health. And then a short time at Third Rock Ventures, putting together various companies in the personalized medicine space. Then did a predictive analytics company in pharmacogenetics, Patients Like Me as their chief business officer, a short time doing venture philanthropy focused on rare disease, and then founded Graticule 7 years ago. And Graticule is a real-world evidence CRO, digital CRO, focusing on EHR and EMR data.
So a fairly typical background, right, Dan?
Yes. I think that all backgrounds as entrepreneurs kind of go through a whole series of companies.
How about you, Ben?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm actually calling in from Berlin, Germany, where I'm now. It's like the lost son that returned to where he started his journey. I grew up in Berlin, and I am a clinician first. So when I started my training, what I was taught was the art of medicine. And so it was very individualized. and very variable. And my personal interest was always to leverage technology as an enabler. And I mean, I started at the time when email addresses were considered like something very futuristic. So that led me to actually go to leave Germany and train at Harvard to see what's out there. And I learned from the best. And I'm very grateful for my mentors and teachers because at Harvard, but also, of course, at other prime institutions, we were able to leverage data for secondary use. And many of our projects were then later commercialized. So I have a background in neuroscience, biostats, and biomedical informatics. And then after half of my professional life, I transitioned into industry to work on more large-scale projects with more industrial impact. So I worked across the US, Asia, and Europe, leveraging real-world data for drug development and clinical research. And now I'm here at Data for Life, which I would consider like the intersection of academia and industry. So we have the scientific approach merged with the industrial ambition to scale. And so we are developing solutions for fair data access via federated networks in partnership with academia and industry. And happy to be on this panel. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben. I guess I should also admit my journey has been a little bit unorthodox. By undergrad training, I'm an accountant, which is a little bit of an unorthodox approach to real-world evidence and real-world data. But on the other hand, you know, my wife never likes me to say that I've been doing for the last 40 years what I have no real qualifications to be doing. But when we think about the importance of independent evidence and the importance of science and the importance of objectivity, you know, that's really actually when you're a company and you're having your financial statements audited, you want that independent third party. Otherwise, it's just you saying that your financial statements are kosher. The reality of where we are right now is that there's kind of a little bit of a conflict with how evidence is being used or misused. And I think it's increasingly important these days to ensure that we're all really focusing on the value of science, the value of evidence, the value of real-world evidence. As I always say, the real world is real messy, but it's also real important. So I think we'll kind of infuse a lot of our discussions today with our individual perspectives and our backgrounds, and it should be a very interesting discussion in view of that. So great. And again, as Sika mentioned, I've been involved with a number of different organizations. I started out on healthcare consulting for providers, and then when the issue of the cost effectiveness of medicine got to be in the forefront through reimbursement changes in the U.S. in the mid-'80s, that's when I started noticing these mysterious pharmaceutical companies that one day would characterize their products as safe and efficacious, and in view of that reimbursement change, the very next day, safe, efficacious, and cost-effective. And I thought to myself, well, wait a minute, you just can't say your product is cost-effective. You actually have to have some evidence behind that. So that got me to shift a little bit to supporting some of the health economic assertions that pharmaceutical companies were making, and that's evolved very naturalistically into what I'm doing now with this whole real-world evidence landscape. So anyway, great. Let's get into some of the topics here. Again, commercial realities, ensuring fit-for-purpose and diverse real-world data strategies for biotech, small biotechs, and big pharma. So let's start with, you know, your perspectives on what are some of those key purposes underlying the use of real-world data, and do those purposes differ in small biotechs versus big pharma? I guess I'm also defining small biotechs, just to narrow our discussion here, as those biotechs that are committed to and maybe one step away from commercialization. So again, what are your perspectives on the key purposes underlying the use of real-world data, providing some context for discussions here, and then if indeed those differences differ dramatically in small biotech versus big pharma? Ben, I'm going to start with you. Your perspectives.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe not to create any redundancies, but do you think it would be good to define what we understand with the term fit for purpose, and maybe also in differentiation to what people refer to regulatory grade data?
I think that'll be useful, again, with the caveat that in my view, some of these purposes are not always to impress regulatory audiences. But yeah, bring that in, Ben. I think that'd be highly appropriate. So fire away.
Yeah, I mean, my view on this is I usually think of regulatory grade more the technical and formal constraints for quality, completeness, and traceability. What the regulatory agency look for, like the FDA and EMA. And fit for purpose, I would say, is a little bit more specific in terms of the use case. So in terms of the relevance, so what is the actual population of interest? Do the real world data actually capture sufficient data to be representative? And then are the endpoints really consistent? Do they matter? And if there are endpoints that are captured in clinical trials, but not in the real world, such as endpoints based on the RECIST criteria, what are the proxies, right? And then, of course, quality as well in terms of data completeness or consistency. But I'm happy to hear also your view then, what your definition is.
Yeah, I mean, so regulatory data is a kind of subset of fit for purpose or fit for person. And fit for purpose, we do every single project. We determine, is that data or what is the data that's fit for purpose? And there's a whole spectrum of it. And it's really about what is the research question and then what is the best data that answers that research question. And whether it's a burden of disease study or natural history study, and it really depends on the disease state. And do the outcomes or the measurements are in that data set? And there's a whole lot of discussion around what kind of questions can you ask of claims data versus EHR versus EMR. And I kind of break out those as two different sets. I look at EHR data as the complete kind of electronic health record of a patient versus EMR is more of a specialty data set. And then you also get into some of these digital data sets that you're starting to see as well that aren't necessarily as kind of looking at what is fit for purpose, as well as you see PRO data, which is becoming interesting and increasing because they're used in clinical trials, but they're not used in clinical care. And can you even find them to create a fit for purpose data? But it's about what is the best available data to answer the question. And there is no perfect data set.
Well, I think that's a statement we'd all agree with. But I'd also emphasize something I think you both said, which is let's start with the question first. I can't tell you how many times I still get calls from companies that said, we'd like to start an observational study this afternoon. Can you help us out? And my initial reaction is that's great, but let's back the train up to the station. What are you trying to achieve? What questions are you trying to address? And it may not be what questions are you trying to answer, because again, the real world has some important limitations and is not an experimental scenario. But then getting to, okay, if those are the analyses you want to do, what are the data sources? How can we perhaps answer them prospectively, retrospectively, and if indeed we're talking about diving into data, over the last several years, technology has been a really wonderful asset for us to really leverage and have better access to data, better access to quality data, whether it's EHR, EMR, claims-based data set, you name it. There's some important progressions out there that we're seeing that we're taking advantage of. How do these, let's talk about, so those are maybe some of the key purposes. And again, asking the right questions, ensuring that we're thinking about why we're doing these projects in the first place, who we're trying to inform with the data, whether it's regulators or other stakeholders or physicians or patients. Patients are kind of important. What are some of the differences in big pharma versus biotech as far as their ability to access and leverage these data? Dan, start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the primary difference is in a biotech, you usually have one asset that you're basically spending all your effort on, and you will do anything that you can to make that asset successful. Versus in big pharma, they're always looking to kill assets and basically reduce down. And we've heard it from many of our sponsors that we have to spread our budgets across 20, 50 different products, and we can't focus on that research question. We just don't have enough budget for it. They can do larger projects and they can do multi-therapeutic area projects, but biotechs are just creative, innovative, trying to figure out the best answer to be able to look at payers, regulators, and changing clinical behavior, which is a huge one where I think that a lot of people think that if they just change the guidelines, they change clinical behavior, but that actually isn't the case. Clinicians are much more nuanced than that. But it's just an innovation space.
Yeah, it's interesting. Is a quote I've often used is that products are approved under conditions that are far different from the way they're actually used, and so that the real world construct is very important. The real world is messy, but it's very important. Ben, thoughts on from your perspective on some of those differences?
Yeah, I think we agree that there are a lot of common points, but I think a differentiator is also the team size and the team structure, where smaller companies are usually very limited on certain resources, be it biostats, be it ETL processes, or even clinical insights from KOL. So I think that also defines how small biotechs approach this question and this challenge, while large companies, of course, have a broader spectrum of personnel and teams, but face different challenges. So when I interacted with Big Pharma, I mean, what they always try to have, as Dan already said, like large data sets that could be reused, repurposed across their platform. And some even have attempted to create like an entire data ecosystem across their therapeutic areas and development stages and failed miserably. So I think being big doesn't always mean that you are more successful. If you're smart and if you are narrow, I think as a small biotech, you have a good chance to be actually much more successful in a more limited scope.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think again, bigness doesn't necessarily always mean they've got a perfect solution for it. In my work with small pharma companies, biotechs, medical device companies, and big pharma. There still, unfortunately, is a little bit of a gulf between the people on the clinical development side and the people on the commercial side. A lot of eye rolling in big pharma that maybe doesn't happen as much in small biotech because everybody has to be on the same page. So I think the use cases kind of mirror the users of real world data, and increasingly, even though I think an entire organization can benefit from real world data, I think the people that tend to be quote unquote owning access and use of real world data and development of real world evidence tend to be kind of in the middle that have a nice balance between science and strategy. Let me just follow up our question with diving right into some of the technological advances of today. So difference between big pharma and small pharma as far as their ability to apply advanced analytics and maybe even artificial intelligence for extracting insights from real world data. Is that a capability that companies, that maybe large pharma companies, can start to invest in themselves? Can they develop internal AI or large language model extraction capabilities, or should they basically rely on vendor solutions? And does it differ by company size? Ben, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, I mean, in general, what I can say on a high level is small small biotechs tend to try to partner and either with academia or outsource it or do strategic partnerships. I see only few who try to build that in-house. And I mean, as we know, unstructured data, there's a lot of challenges, and LLMs don't necessarily solve these problems. On the other hand, I mean, big pharma tends to develop that in-house because they consider that also as an asset and a strategic advantage or differentiation. But again, the challenge is, of course, that there are limited data sets that are used for that, and also access, longitudinal access differs. So I wouldn't say one or the other approach is better or more successful, but it's just different, and it's frequently determined just by company policy, and that is dictated mostly by money. But happy to hear the panel's opinion.
Dan, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated because I find that although small biotech firms don't have the personnel, they take more risk. So they tend to be more innovative and more pushing the envelope, especially in touching unstructured data, since a lot of the small biotech are focused on rare disease or complex disease, and unstructured data are incredibly important. And the way we've de-identified data historically has not been very good. And AI and machine learning can do a much better job of it and keep the contextual information there. On the large pharma side, I find that they've been doing these internal AI projects, but when they want to translate them to the RWE data, they kind of have a challenge because a lot of the academic institutions that have the RWE data don't, especially in Europe, don't like pharma touching their data. So we've tended to be an honest broker between the two. So you create systems, especially because in Europe you can't move data to them, which has made things even more challenging. In the US, much easier. You just take an aggregate data set and they can consume it in-house. In Europe, you need more federated approaches, complex approaches, keeping data in country. There's a whole series of challenges in Europe, but there's a lot of opportunity for it because better understanding disease earlier, changing clinical practice. There's just so many opportunities, and we've just kind of in the early stage of things.
Yeah, I agree. I was talking to somebody yesterday about artificial intelligence applications, and by no means am I anywhere near an expert in this field, but being able to tap into AI for protocol optimization, for developing a better, more optimal protocol, and fundamentally on the back end for crunching tons of data in, I won't say in seconds, but a lot quicker than your average statistician can. Interpreting it, making sense out of it, maybe that's a different story, but still, it's an interesting time that we're in. Let's talk a little bit about the sources of data that are out there. Dan, you alluded to differences between EHR and EMR and claims. How do big pharma and biotechs kind of sort through in the time we've been talking today, I'm sure there's been 2 or 3 more vendors that have come to fruition these days. So how do companies make sense out of the data that are out there? How do they sort through the various RWD offerings? Ben, why don't you start? Or either one. Dan, Ben?
Yeah, I can take this. I mean, I have to say, if you start with the integrated evidence plan, where they're basically mostly using claims data and clinical data, and then they start to think about how to answer their questions, it's very hard because they really don't know what data is out there, and they don't know to the extent of how that data can impact and enhance their research question, answer their research question. And so they've now created these centralized, at least in big pharma, these centralized groups to look through a a whole series of data that is out there, but they tend to really look at licensable data. And in Europe, there isn't really licensable data. There's registry data, and then there is going and building a research network across the health systems where the really interesting deep data, and the fact that we have this Odyssey and OMOP, and now you go to the Eden Foundation, which is the evolution of Eden, which is a whole subject we could talk about for a whole session. It just a start of making tools better available, but it's still not the kind of licensable data that pharma and biotech are used to that they see in the US. So there's no easy way to do this. And I really think that the centralized data partnership groups actually make it more complicated because they don't understand the research question that the individual teams are trying to answer.
That's interesting. I see some benefits in having kind of a center of excellence or centralized approach, but if they're not really addressing the right questions, that doesn't help anybody. Ben, what are some of your thoughts, and maybe you can also address initiatives like Darwin EU. How does that affect the RWD offerings out there?
It's very interesting if you compare it geographically. So let's say Europe versus USA and Asia, especially Korea. It might be a cultural thing, but I mean, each of these regions tries to address the problem differently. So I would say in Korea, it's more like a policy thing, how they try to address that. So they have policies that real-world data have to be used for HTA. And I mean, if you look at Korea, they have some of the lowest prices. I mean, they're very efficient in getting the prices down due to their HTA analyses. In Europe, it seems to be they try to approach the problem from a technology perspective. So they build these data networks such as Darwin or Eden as a precursor. And they try to have the buy-in from the data providers. But it's also always a little bit phased based on grants that support these networks. So it's, I would say, like 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards. And in the US, it's more like data now these days, real-world data are seen like a commodity, right? And facing different challenges where the lack of longitudinality sometimes limits the value of the data, where you then have to add like tokenization and other technologies. But I think what each of the countries' main challenges, and that's not addressed, is I would say is not the data we have, but the data we don't have, right? And I mean, I always call that the observership bias, right? Because you only look at what you have. And I think that is one of the fatalities. And I mean, when you look at observational data, I mean, it's always the same challenges like bias, confounding, right? And just size or technology or policies doesn't address that.
Yeah, that's an important limitation that we should all be aware of. Again, I'll say it for the third time. The real world is real important, but it is real messy, and we're selective in what information is out there. And to your point, what's not out there may be quite revealing. Let's talk a little bit about the stakeholders who the pharma companies are looking. I mean, again, I think there's a lot of internal purposes that they're looking to address as far as access to some of these real world data sets. But Dan, you mentioned the integrated evidence plan. Many of the pharma companies really recognize that if we have a plan to reach out and inform various stakeholders, that again, real world data can be an important element of that. So let's talk a little bit about those external stakeholders. Who are pharma looking to inform with real world evidence, with real world data? And again, is there any, thinking maybe holistically, is there any advantage that big pharma has over small biotech in their quest ultimately to use the data, to use the evidence? Ben, start with you.
Maybe I can start. I'm sorry for hijacking these questions or twisting them, but I would say I'd like to start with who is frequently not considered a stakeholder, and that is actually the patient, right? I mean, Dan also already mentioned that PROs, so patient-reported outcomes, is something that is not always considered. I mean, it's a part of, or certain questionnaires are part of clinical trials, but in general, when we work with our partners, pros are not really in the center of attention. And so that's why we also build some solutions that actually integrate these in our solution. I would say for small biotechs, it's really the advantage of what Dan also mentioned, that I mean, academia in general hates big pharma, although I mean some transition, and so there's always this overlap. But biotechs tend to have a better chance to partner with academia, and I think that is very crucial because these are the people who have the insights and can inform, especially when it comes to like the longitudinality of the data and also the specificity of the therapeutic area. What I see for big pharma is trying to do like global integrations for long-term planning, and so they tend to have a better leverage when it comes to interacting with the regulatory agencies and also with the ministries. So it's how you position yourself strategically. And as Dan said, I mean, small biotechs tend to be a little bit more, have to be more innovative. And so I see a really big potential in that industry academic partnership with the small biotechs.
Thanks, Ben. Dan, I know that patients, as Ben said, patients are kind of important and maybe underutilized as far as being targets for real-world evidence. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. I spent a long time at Patients Like Me and making patients the center of kind of patient-centered research, and that actually has changed pharma and how they do things. But it's still not as far along as I would like it to be. You are seeing PROs in areas where endpoints are not good, in the whole neuropsych area, in neurology, immunology, where there's not good endpoints. So you are seeing PROs, quality of life, being integrated in. The problem is it's not used in clinical care. So you can use it in clinical trials, but you can't use it in clinical care unless you do an observational kind of rolling retrospective or prospective study. It just makes it hard. Another real challenge in this space is we kind of look at clinical data, and then RWE is anything not clinical data. And you're starting to see where traditionally in clinical trials, they would copy and paste EHR and EMR data into an EDC. And you're seeing an evolution right now where they're actually using technology to do that. And that's a whole nother space, which is really interesting, which is where they're starting to do is on the edges, which is after a clinical trial is done, can you collect the data on the patients in perpetuity, and you have the case and control? So you have a much more kind of structured data set. And that's a really interesting space because you can collect a lot of high quality data on those patients. And there's good technologies and ways to do that today. And you'll continue to evolve. I mean, de-identification is still an issue of that data set, but it's an interesting space. We've been spending a lot of time trying to change clinical behavior and understand the care gaps. And that's another place for RWE to be used. But traditionally, it's payers, regulators, HTA bodies, and it's a evolution of a space because you're always trying to innovate and get better and more efficient. But I think the difference between biotech and pharma is what we've said before, that biotech is just innovative and creative, but pharma can do it in much larger scale.
Yeah,
and larger budgets and impact. Yes.
What you're saying that really rings true. And again, there's no perfect solution, big pharma or smaller biotech. I'm also struck by what you said about the patient perspective. I remember talking to the head of a electronic medical record organization, and I said, every time we do an observational study, we have to construct a scenario where we're capturing patient-reported outcomes from patients. Wouldn't it be great to have a module in an EMR that had PROs? They said, "No, we have that." I go, "No, you don't." You'd think though that giving clinicians the opportunity to find out what's happening about their patients between regular visits, that might be a little bit important. But at any rate, let me move on. I just realized that we've got a lot of questions from the audience here. I'm going to see if I can dive into a couple of them. How about what role does real-world data play in post-market surveillance? How does this approach differ for small biotechs versus big pharma when it comes to monitoring real-world safety and efficacy after launch? Dan, why don't you take that for a second?
Yeah, traditionally, this has been using claims data, but there's a lot of challenges with claims data because it doesn't usually have a lot of the outcomes of interest. And you're starting to see a transition to wanting to use EHR data, EMR data, but it's much more expensive, it's harder to do, and so you have this push and pull. It's interesting, Europe has really required post-approval safety studies now for almost all products, versus in the US, they really use a common system to do it that is based on claims and a little EHR. So it's an evolving space. From a small biotech to a big pharma, very different of how they do this. And it's really because a pharma can leverage systems across multiple products in a TA or space, and a biotech is only focused on one. And a lot of times you want to not only do the regulatory required safety study, but you also want to do the evidence generation, which is a separate study, and you have to have separate data sets for that. You can't use the same data set or it basically will impact your outcomes.
Yeah, no, it's the post-marketing area is fascinating, and there are certainly important geographic differences and different endpoints that we're looking for. And I think the whole opportunity to dive into real-world data for safety hints, as well as the opportunity to explore maybe expanded labeling, is a whole another area that probably don't have time for. Ben, your perspective on some of the post-marketing uses?
Yeah, thank you very much. Dan covered a lot. I think it's one of the big differences I see is the timing. So small biotechs usually think about it like after the drug was approved. So how do we do the post-marketing study? And big pharma does plans that ahead of time. Not always in the best way, but they keep that definitely in mind. As an excuse, I have to, however, call in those folks that are very close to you, Jeff, like folks from ISPOR, the pharmacoepidemiologists. They have all the knowledge, the theory, and they have all the policies. But when it comes to operationalizing HTA studies and what kind of visualizations you want, what kind of analysis you want, and like what kind of format should you use, they leave the companies alone. I don't know what your view on that is, but I think there is a little bit lack of a unified vision on how HTA should be actually done on the data.
Yeah, well, that is a whole other issue, and interestingly enough, ISPOR has played around with kind of a quote unquote seal of approval of methodologies on studies, but it's far removed from looking to standardize any methodologies or HTA approaches. That's it's an interesting time. Dan, you rolled your eyes a little bit at some of the things that Ben said.
No, I find that it's a having been active at ISPOR and at ISP, where I was just a few weeks ago. They try to implement standards, but it's very hard to implement standards They really love their table shelves, which I always kind of question, like we're in a modern age, couldn't we used a more dynamic output? But my teams do it as well, so I'm not going to complain about how they do it. It's the standard way of doing it, but in a way that you could have more of a dashboard or more kind of interactive output. There's a lot of interesting things you can use with machine learning and AI and other things that nobody uses. It's interesting. At ISPE, I went to a medical device SIG, which is super interesting. But medical devices are not have the same kind of outcomes traditionally, but they're starting to require, back to the question before, they need long-term outcomes, they need MDR, they need safety, and traditionally used US data for European outcomes, and that's not allowed anymore. So very much a changing space.
Yes. Something I say often is that shift happens, and I think we just have to avoid stepping in the shift. I know we have less than 4 minutes left. Let's talk about closing comments. Ben, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it's a dynamic space. I think we shouldn't fall into the fallacy to think that new technologies solves the core problems. So, I mean, for me, AI or machine learning is just a technology. It doesn't really it automates things. It opens more options. But I mean, the core is really the science and to understand the biases and the confounders. For my vision, what I would like to see, however, is something similar, maybe as a tumor board. So where we have like different experts, clinicians, data scientists, policymakers who look in real time at the data and inform on the data. So something interactive and really on time, because if you just try to hoard your data and try to keep them for yourself and try to extract the most advantage for yourself. I mean, even data, especially real data, have a half-life. They are not a permanent asset. And so something like a tumor board would be my vision for the future. I say so.
Thanks, Ben. Dan, your thoughts, maybe vision for the future as well?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that the past has all been a claims data centric world. And there is, because of technology, you can do things at scale to really get into EHR data, EMR data, and much deeper data. So all that unstructured data just opens up. You can also get into imaging data, pathology data, genomic data in a way that you could never do before. So I guess from the vision of the future is, how do we leverage all this data? How do we make it computable? How do we kind of take it to the next level and not keep it, not use old kind of formats, old structures to how we think of things? I look at like EDCs. I'd like to get away from EDCs and more into like an OMOP data repository. But like this is thinking forward, thinking future, being innovative and creative and solving problems and improving the lives of patients.
Yeah, fundamentally improving the lives of patients is kind of important. I'm obviously being facetious about that. If we start there, and I think, again, my perspective is different companies have different abilities to absorb and ingest these data, to leverage technology, to leverage data. But it's in the intelligent use of data that really needs to start with what the question is first, and really leveraging all the smart people in an organization. But there still are some different perspectives, and ultimately the people that can access the information need to ensure that they're representing the entire organization and all the stakeholders of that organization, patients and physicians first of all. I think that's all we have time for. I'll turn it back to you, Shika, and we'll take it away, right?
Thank you so much, Dan, Ben, and Jeff, for that insightful session. Thank you for, we're honored to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.